Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we wander into the warm glow of an old and beloved treasury of tales, a gentle retelling inspired by the charm and wonder of the red fairy tradition. These are stories gathered from many lands, carried across generations, filled with mystery, bravery, mischief, and magic. If this quiet journey brings you calm, feel free to like and subscribe and share where you're listening from tonight. Now, settle in, let the world soften and grow still, and join me as we step into a crimson-lit realm of folklore, where every page whispers a new enchantment for dreamers like you. The Wonderful Birch. Once upon a time, there were a man and a woman who had an only daughter. Now it happened that one of their sheep went astray, and they set out to look for it, and searched, each in a different part of the wood. Then the good wife met a witch, who said to her, "If you spit, you miserable creature, if you spit into the sheath of my knife, or if you run between my legs, I shall change you into a black sheep." The woman neither spat, nor did she run between her legs, but yet the witch changed her into a sheep. Then she made herself look exactly like the woman, and called out to the good man, "Ho, old man, halloa, I have found the sheep already." The man thought the witch was really his wife, and he did not know that his wife was the sheep. So he went home with her, glad at heart because his sheep was found. When they were safe at home, the witch said to the man, "Look here, old man, we must really kill that sheep, lest it run away to the wood again." The man, who was a peaceable, quiet sort of fellow, made no objections, but simply said, "Good, let us do so." The daughter, however, had overheard their talk, and she ran to the flock and lamented aloud, "Oh dear little mother, they are going to slaughter you." "Well then, if they do slaughter me," was the black sheep's answer, "eat you neither the meat nor the broth that is made of me, but gather all my bones and bury them by the edge of the field." Shortly after this, they took the black sheep from the flock and slaughtered it. The witch made peas soup of it and set it before the daughter. But the girl remembered her mother's warning. She did not touch the soup, but she carried the bones to the edge of the field and buried them there. And there sprang up on the spot a birch tree, a very lovely birch tree. Some time had passed away. Who can tell how long they might have been living there, when the witch, to whom a child had been born in the meantime, began to take an ill will to the man's daughter, and to torment her in all sorts of ways. Now it happened that a great festival was to be held at the palace, and the king had commanded that all the people should be invited, and that this proclamation should be made. "Come, people all, poor and wretched one and all, blind and crippled though ye be, mount your steeds or come by sea." And so they drove into the king's feast all the outcasts, and the maimed, and the halt, and the blind. In the good man's house, too, preparations were made to go to the palace. The witch said to the man, "Go you on in front, old man, with our youngest. I will give the elder girl work to keep her from being dull in our absence." So the man took the child and set out. But the witch kindled a fire on the hearth, threw a pot full of barley corns among the cinders, and said to the girl, "If you have not picked the barley out of the ashes and put it all back in the pot before nightfall, I shall eat you up." Then she hastened after the others, and the poor girl stayed at home and wept. She tried to be sure to pick up the grains of barley, but she soon saw how useless her labor was, And so she went in her sore trouble to the birch tree on her mother's grave, and cried, because her mother lay dead beneath the sod, and could help her no longer. In the midst of her grief, she suddenly heard her mother's voice speak from the grave, and say to her, "Why do you weep, little daughter? The witch has scattered barleycorns on the hearth, and bid me pick them out of the ashes," said the girl. "That is why I weep, dear little mother." "Do not weep," said her mother consolingly. "Break off one of my branches, and strike the hearth with it crosswise, and all will be put right." The girl did so. She struck the hearth with the birchen branch, and lo, the barleycorns flew into the pot, and the hearth was clean. Then she went back to the birch tree and laid the branch upon the grave. Then her mother bade her bathe on one side of the stem, dry herself on another, and dress on the third. When the girl had done all that, she had grown so lovely that no one on earth could rival her. Splendid clothing was given to her, and a horse with hair partly of gold, partly of silver, and partly of something more precious still. The girl sprang into the saddle and rode as swift as an arrow to the palace. As she turned into the courtyard of the castle, the king's son came out to meet her, tied her steed to a pillar, and led her in. He never left her side as they passed through the castle rooms, and all the people gazed at her and wondered who the lovely maiden was, and from what castle she came. But no one knew her. No one knew anything about her. At the banquet, the prince invited her to sit next him in the place of honor, but the witch's daughter gnawed the bones under the table. The prince did not see her, and thinking it was a dog, he gave her such a push with his foot that her arm was broken. Are you not sorry for the witch's daughter? It was not her fault that her mother was a witch. Towards evening, the good man's daughter thought it was time to go home, but as she went, her ring caught on the latch of the door, for the king's son had had it smeared with tar. She did not take time to pull it off, but hastily unfastening her horse from the pillar, she rode away beyond the castle walls as swift as an arrow. Arrived at home, she took off her clothes by the birch tree, left her horse standing there, and hastened to her place behind the stove. In a short time, the man and the woman came home again too, and the witch said to the girl, "Ah, you poor thing, there you are to be sure. You don't know what fine times we have had at the palace. The king's son carried my daughter about, but the poor thing fell and broke her arm." The girl knew well how matters really stood, but she pretended to know nothing about it and sat dumb behind the stove. The next day they were invited again to the king's banquet. "Hey, old man," said the witch, "get on your clothes as quick as you can. We are bidden to the feast. Take you the child. I will give the other one work, lest she weary." She kindled the fire, threw a pot full of hemp seed among the ashes, and said to the girl, "If you do not get this sorted and all the seed back into the pot, I shall kill you." The girl wept bitterly. Then she went to the birch tree, washed herself on one side of it, and dried herself on the other. And this time still finer clothes were given to her, and a very beautiful steed. She broke off a branch of the birch tree, struck the hearth with it, so that the seeds flew into the pot, and then hastened to the castle. Again the king's son came out to meet her, tied her horse to a pillar, and led her into the banqueting hall. At the feast, the girl sat next him in the place of honor, as she had done the day before. But the witch's daughter gnawed bones under the table, and the prince gave her a push by mistake, which broke her leg. He had never noticed her crawling about among the people's feet. She was very unlucky. The good man's daughter hastened home again betimes, but the king's son had smeared the doorposts with tar, and the girl's golden circlet stuck to it. She had not time to look for it, but sprang to the saddle and rode like an arrow to the birch tree. There she left her horse and her fine clothes, and said to her mother, "I have lost my circlet at the castle. The doorpost was tarred, and it stuck fast." "And even had you lost 2 of them," answered her mother, "I would give you finer ones." Then the girl hastened home, and when her father came home from the feast with the witch, she was in her usual place behind the stove. Then the witch said to her, "You poor thing! What is there to see here compared with what we have seen at the palace? The king's son carried my daughter from one room to another. He let her fall, 'tis true, and my child's foot was broken. The man's daughter held her peace all the time and busied herself about the hearth. The night passed, and when the day began to dawn, the witch awakened her husband, crying, 'Hi, get up, old man, we are bidden to the royal banquet.' So the old man got up. Then the witch gave him the child, saying, 'Take you the little one. I will give the other girl work to do, else she will weary at home alone.' She did as usual. This time it was a dish of milk she poured upon the ashes, saying, 'If you do not get all the milk into the dish again before I come home, you will suffer for it.' How frightened the girl was this time! She ran to the birch tree, and by its magic power her task was accomplished, and then she rode away to the palace as before. When she got to the courtyard, she found the prince waiting for her. He led her into the hall, where she was highly honored, but the witch's daughter sucked the bones under the table, and crouching at the people's feet, she got an eye knocked out. Poor thing! Now no one knew any more than before about the good man's daughter. No one knew whence she came. But the prince had had the threshold smeared with tar, and as she fled, her gold slippers stuck to it. She reached the birch tree, and laying aside her finery, she said, "Alas, I dear little mother, I have lost my gold slippers." "Let them be," was her mother's reply. "If you need them, I shall give you finer ones." Scarcely was she in her usual place behind the stove when her father came home with the witch. Immediately the witch began to mock her, saying, "Ah, you poor thing, there is nothing for you to see here, and what great things we have seen at the palace. My little girl was carried about again, but had the ill luck to fall and get her eye knocked out. You stupid thing, you! What do you know about anything?" "Yes, indeed. What can I know?" replied the girl. "I had enough to do to get the hearth clean." Now the prince had kept all the things the girl had lost, and he soon set about finding the owner of them. For this purpose, a great banquet was given on the 4th day, and all the people were invited to the palace. The witch got ready to go too. She tied a wooden beetle on where her child's foot should have been, a log of wood instead of an arm, and stuck a bit of dirt in the empty socket for an eye, and took the child with her to the castle. When all the people were gathered together, the king's son stepped in among the crowd and cried, "The maiden whose finger this ring slips over, whose head this golden hoop encircles, and whose foot this shoe fits, shall be my bride." What a great trying on there was now among them all. The things would fit no one, however. "The cinder wench is not here," said the prince at last. "Go and fetch her, and let her try on the things." So the girl was fetched, and the prince was just going to hand the ornaments to her, when the witch held him back, saying, "Don't give them to her. She soils everything with cinders. Give them to my daughter, rather." Well, then the prince gave the witch's daughter the ring, and the woman filed and pared away at her daughter's finger till the ring fitted. It was the same with the circlet and the shoes of gold. The witch would not allow them to be handed to the cinder wench. She worked at her own daughter's head and feet till she got the things forced on. What was to be done now? The prince had to take the witch's daughter for his bride whether he would or no. He sneaked away to her father's house with her, however, for he was ashamed to hold the wedding festivities at the palace with so strange a bride. Some days passed, and at last he had to take his bride home to the palace, and he got ready to do so. Just as they were taking leave, the kitchen wench sprang down from her place by the stove on the pretext of fetching something from the cowhouse, and in going by she whispered in the prince's ear as he stood in the yard, "Alas, dear prince, do not rob me of my silver and my gold." Thereupon the king's son recognized the cinder wench, so he took both the girls with him and set out. After they had gone some little way, they came to the bank of a river, and the prince threw the witch's daughter across to serve as a bridge, and so got over with the cinder wench. There lay the witch's daughter then, like a bridge over the river, and could not stir, though her heart was consumed with grief. No help was near, so she cried at last in her anguish, "May there grow a golden hemlock out of my body. Perhaps my mother will know me by that token." Scarcely had she spoken when a golden hemlock sprang up from her and stood upon the bridge. Now, as soon as the prince had got rid of the witch's daughter, he greeted the cinder wench as his bride, and they wandered together to the birch tree which grew upon the mother's grave. There they received all sorts of treasures and riches, 3 sacks full of gold, and as much silver, and a splendid steed, which bore them home to the palace. There they lived a long time together, and the young wife bore a son to the prince. Immediately word was brought to the witch that her daughter had borne a son, for they all believed the young king's wife to be the witch's daughter. So, said the witch to herself, I had better away with my gift for the infant then. And so saying, she set out. Thus it happened that she came to the bank of the river, and there she saw the beautiful golden hemlock growing in the middle of the bridge. And when she began to cut it down to take to her grandchild, she heard a voice moaning, "Alas, dear mother, do not cut me so." "Are you here?" demanded the witch. "Indeed I am, dear little mother," answered the daughter. "They threw me across the river to make a bridge of me." In a moment the witch had the bridge shivered to atoms, and then she hastened away to the palace. Stepping up to the young queen's bed, she began to try her magic arts upon her, saying, "Spit, you wretch, on the blade of my knife. Bewitch my knife's blade for me, and I shall change you into a reindeer of the forest." "Are you there again to bring trouble upon me?" said the young woman. She neither spat nor did anything else, but still the witch changed her into a reindeer and smuggled her own daughter into her place as the prince's wife. But now the child grew restless and cried because it missed its mother's care. They took it to the court and tried to pacify it in every conceivable way, but its crying never ceased. "What makes the child so restless?" asked the prince, and he went to a wise widow woman to ask her advice. Aye, your own wife is not at home," said the widow woman. "She is living like a reindeer in the wood. You have the witch's daughter for a wife now, and the witch herself for a mother-in-law." "Is there any way of getting my own wife back from the wood again?" asked the prince. "Give me the child," answered the widow woman. "I'll take it with me tomorrow when I go to drive the cows to the wood. I'll make a rustling among the birch leaves and a trembling among the aspens. Perhaps the boy will grow quiet when he hears it." "Yes, take the child away. Take it to the wood with you to quiet it," said the prince, and led the widow woman into the castle. "How now? You are going to send the child away to the wood," said the witch in a suspicious tone, and tried to interfere. But the king's son stood firm by what he had commanded, and said, "Carry the child about the wood. Perhaps that will pacify it." So the widow woman took the child to the wood. She came to the edge of a marsh, and seeing a herd of reindeer there, she began all at once to sing, "Little Bright Eyes, little Redskin, come nurse the child you bore. That bloodthirsty monster, that man-eater Grimm, shall nurse him, shall tend him no more. They may threaten and force as they will, he turns from her, shrinks from her still." And immediately the reindeer drew near, and nursed and tended the child the whole day long. But at nightfall it had to follow the herd, and said to the widow woman, "Bring me the child tomorrow," and again the following day. "After that I must wander with the herd far away to other lands." The following morning the widow woman went back to the castle to fetch the child. The witch interfered, of course, but the prince said, "Take it and carry it about in the open air. The boy is quieter at night, to be sure, when he has been in the wood all day." So the widow took the child in her arms and carried it to the marsh in the forest. There she sang as on the preceding day, "Little Bright Eyes, little Redskin, come nurse the child you bore. That bloodthirsty monster, that man-eater Grimm, shall nurse him, shall tend him no more. They may threaten and force as they will. He turns from her, shrinks from her still." And immediately the reindeer left the herd and came to the child, and tended it as on the day before. And so it was that the child throve, till not a finer boy was to be seen anywhere. But the king's son had been pondering over all these things, and he said to the widow woman, "Is there no way of changing the reindeer into a human being again?" "I don't rightly know," was her answer. "Come to the wood with me, however. When the woman puts off her reindeer skin, I shall comb her head for her. Whilst I am doing so, you must burn the skin." Thereupon they both went to the wood with the child. Scarcely were they there when the reindeer appeared, and nursed the child as before. Then the widow woman said to the reindeer, "Since you are going far away tomorrow, and I shall not see you again, let me comb your head for the last time, as a remembrance of you." Good. The young woman stripped off the reindeer skin, and let the widow woman do as she wished. In the meantime, the king's son threw the reindeer skin into the fire unobserved. "What smells of singeing here?" asked the young woman, and looking round, she saw her own husband. "Woe is me! You have burnt my skin. Why did you do that?" "To give you back your human form again." "Alack-a-day! I have nothing to cover me now, poor creature that I am!" cried the young woman, and transformed herself first into a distaff, then into a wooden beetle, then into a spindle, and into all imaginable shapes. But all these shapes the king's son went on destroying, till she stood before him in human form again. "Alas! Wherefore take me home with you again," cried the young woman. since the witch is sure to eat me up." "She will not eat you up," answered her husband, and they started for home with the child. But when the witch-wife saw them, she ran away with her daughter, and if she has not stopped, she is running still, though at a great age. And the prince and his wife and the baby lived happy ever afterwards. Jack Ajack sells the cow. Endy the Beanstalk. Once upon a time, there was a poor widow who lived in a little cottage with her only son, Jack. Jack was a giddy, thoughtless boy, but very kind-hearted and affectionate. There had been a hard winter, and after it the poor woman had suffered from fever and ague. Jack did no work as yet, and by degrees they grew dreadfully poor. The widow saw that there was no means of keeping Jack and herself from starvation but by selling her cow. So one morning she said to her son, "I am too weak to go myself, Jack, so you must take the cow to market for me and sell her." Jack liked going to market to sell the cow very much, but as he was on the way, he met a butcher who had some beautiful beans in his hand. Jack stopped to look at them, and the butcher told the boy that they were of great value, and persuaded the silly lad to sell the cow for these beans. When he brought them home to his mother instead of the money she expected for her nice cow, she was very vexed and shed many tears, scolding Jack for his folly. He was very sorry, and mother and son went to bed very sadly that night. Their last hope seemed gone. At daybreak, Jack rose and went out into the garden. "At least," he thought, "I will sow the wonderful beans. Mother says that they are just common scarlet runners and nothing else, but I may as well sow them." So he took a piece of stick and made some holes in the ground and put in the beans. That day they had very little dinner and went sadly to bed, knowing that for the next day there would be none, and Jack, unable to sleep from grief and vexation, got up at day dawn and went out into the garden. What was his amazement to find that the beans had grown up in the night and climbed up and up till they covered the high cliff that sheltered the cottage and disappeared above it. The stalks had twined and twisted themselves together till they formed quite a ladder. It would be easy to climb it, thought Jack. And having thought of the experiment, he at once resolved to carry it out, for Jack was a good climber. However, after his late mistake about the cow, he thought he had better consult his mother first. Wonderful growth of the beanstalk! So Jack called his mother, and they both gazed in silent wonder at the beanstalk, which was not only of great height, but was thick enough to bear Jack's weight. "I wonder where it ends," said Jack to his mother. "I think I will climb up and see." His mother wished him not to venture up this strange ladder, but Jack coaxed her to give her consent to the attempt, for he was certain there must be something wonderful in the beanstalk. So at last she yielded to his wishes. Jack instantly began to climb, and went up and up on the ladder-like bean till everything he had left behind him, the cottage, the village, and even the tall church tower, looked quite little, and still he could not see the top of the beanstalk. Jack felt a little tired, and thought for a moment that he would go back again. But he was a very persevering boy, and he knew that the way to succeed in anything is not to give up. So, after resting for a moment, he went on. After climbing higher and higher, till he grew afraid to look down for fear he should be giddy, Jack at last reached the top of the beanstalk, and found himself in a beautiful country, finely wooded, with beautiful meadows covered with sheep. A crystal stream ran through the pastures, Not far from the place where he had got off, the Beanstalk, stood a fine, strong castle. Jack wondered very much that he had never heard of or seen this castle before. But when he reflected on the subject, he saw that it was as much separated from the village by the perpendicular rock on which it stood as if it were in another land. While Jack was standing looking at the castle, a very strange-looking woman came out of the wood and advanced towards him. She wore a pointed cap of quilted red satin turned up with ermine. Her hair streamed loose over her shoulders, and she walked with a staff. Jack took off his cap and made her a bow. "If you please, ma'am," said he, "is this your house?" "No," said the old lady. "Listen, and I will tell you the story of that castle. Once upon a time, there was a noble knight who lived in this castle, which is on the borders of fairyland. He had a fair and beloved wife and several lovely children, and as his neighbors, the little people, were very friendly towards him. They bestowed on him many excellent and precious gifts. Rumor whispered of these treasures, and a monstrous giant, who lived at no great distance, and who was a very wicked being, resolved to obtain possession of them. So he bribed a false servant to let him inside the castle when the knight was in bed and asleep, and he killed him as he lay. Then he went to the part of the castle which was the nursery, and also killed all the poor little ones he found there. Happily for her, the lady was not to be found. She had gone with her infant son, who was only 2 or 3 months old, to visit her old nurse, who lived in the valley, and she had been detained all night there by a storm. The next morning, as soon as it was light, one of the servants at the castle, who had managed to escape, came to tell the poor lady of the sad fate of her husband and her pretty babes. She could scarcely believe him at first, and was eager at once to go back and share the fate of her dear ones. But the old nurse, with many tears, besought her to remember that she had still a child, and that it was her duty to preserve her life for the sake of the poor innocent. The lady yielded to this reasoning, and consented to remain at her nurse's house as the best place of concealment. For the servant told her that the giant had vowed, if he could find her, he would kill both her and her baby. Years rolled on. The old nurse died, leaving her cottage and the few articles of furniture it contained to her poor lady, who dwelt in it, working as a peasant for her daily bread. Her spinning wheel and the milk of a cow, which she had purchased with the little money she had with her, sufficed for the scanty subsistence of herself and her little son. There was a nice little garden attached to the cottage, in which they cultivated peas, beans, and cabbages, and the lady was not ashamed to go out at harvest time and glean in the fields to supply her little son's wants. "Jack, that poor lady is your mother. This castle was once your father's, and must again be yours." Jack uttered a cry of surprise. "My mother? Oh, madam, what ought I to do? My poor father, my dear mother." "Your duty requires you to win it back for your mother, but the task is a very difficult one and full of peril, Jack. Have you courage to undertake it?" "I fear nothing when I am doing right," said Jack. "Then," said the lady in the red cap, "you are one of those who slay giants. You must get into the castle, and if possible possess yourself of a hen that lays golden eggs and a harp that talks. Remember, all the giant possesses is really yours." As she ceased speaking, the lady of the red hat suddenly disappeared, and of course, Jack knew she was a fairy. Jack determined at once to attempt the adventure, so he advanced and blew the horn which hung at the castle portal. The door was opened in a minute or two by a frightful giantess, with one great eye in the middle of her forehead. As soon as Jack saw her, he turned to run away. But she caught him and dragged him into the castle. "Ho, ho, ho!" she laughed terribly. "You didn't expect to see me here, that is clear. No, I shan't let you go again. I am weary of my life. I am so overworked, and I don't see why I should not have a page as well as other ladies. And you shall be my boy. You shall clean the knives and black the boots and make the fires, and help me generally when the giant is out. When he is at home, I must hide you, for he has eaten up all my pages hitherto, and you would be a dainty morsel, my little lad." While she spoke, she dragged Jack right into the castle. The poor boy was very much frightened, as I am sure you and I would have been in his place. But he remembered that fear disgraces a man, so he struggled to be brave and make the best of things. "I am quite ready to help you and do all I can to serve you, madam," he said. "Only I beg you will be good enough to hide me from your husband, for I should not like to be eaten at all." "That's a good boy," said the giantess, nodding her head. "It is lucky for you that you did not scream out when you saw me, as the other boys who have been here did. For if you had done so, my husband would have awakened and have eaten you, as he did them, for breakfast. Come here, child, go into my wardrobe. He never ventures to open that. You will be safe there." And she opened a huge wardrobe which stood in the great hall, and shut him into it. But the keyhole was so large that it admitted plenty of air, and he could see everything that took place through it. By and by he heard a heavy tramp on the stairs, like the lumbering along of a great cannon. And then a voice like thunder cried out, "Fe, fa, fee, fo, fum, I smell the breath of an Englishman. Let him be alive, or let him be dead. I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "Wife," cried the giant, "there is a man in the castle. Let me have him for breakfast." "You are grown old and stupid," cried the lady in her loud tones. "It is only a nice, fresh steak off an elephant that I have cooked for you, which you smell. There, sit down and make a good breakfast." And she placed a huge dish before him of savory, steaming meat, which greatly pleased him, and made him forget his idea of an Englishman being in the castle. When he had breakfasted, he went out for a walk, and then the giantess opened the door and made Jack come out to help her. He helped her all day. She fed him well, and when evening came, put him back in the wardrobe. The hen that lays golden eggs. The giant came in to supper. Jack watched him through the keyhole and was amazed to see him pick a wolf's bone and put half a fowl at a time into his capacious mouth. When the supper was ended, he bade his wife bring him his hen that laid the golden eggs. "It lays as well as it did when it belonged to that paltry knight," he said. "Indeed, I think the eggs are heavier than ever." The giantess went away and soon returned with a little brown hen, which she placed on the table before her husband. "And now, my dear," she said, "I am going for a walk, if you don't want me any longer." "Go," said the giant. "I shall be glad to have a nap by and by." Then he took up the brown hen and said to her, "Lay," and she instantly laid a golden egg. "Lay," said the giant again, and she laid another. "Lay," he repeated the third time, and again a golden egg lay on the table. Now Jack was sure this hen was that of which the fairy had spoken. By and by, the giant put the hen down on the floor, and soon after went fast asleep, snoring so loud that it sounded like thunder. Directly Jack perceived that the giant was fast asleep, he pushed open the door of the wardrobe and crept out. Very softly he stole across the room, and, picking up the hen, made haste to quit the apartment. He knew the way to the kitchen, the door of which he found was left ajar. He opened it, shut, and locked it after him, and flew back to the beanstalk, which he descended as fast as his feet would move. When his mother saw him enter the house, she wept for joy, for she had feared that the fairies had carried him away, or that the giant had found him. But Jack put the brown hen down before her, and told her how he had been in the giant's castle and all his adventures. She was very glad to see the hen, which would make them rich once more. The money bags. Jack made another journey up the beanstalk to the giant's castle one day, while his mother had gone to market, but first he dyed his hair and disguised himself. The old woman did not know him again, and dragged him in as she had done before to help her to do the work. But she heard her husband coming and hid him in the wardrobe, not thinking that it was the same boy who had stolen the hen. She bade him stay quite still there, or the giant would eat him. Then the giant came in saying, "Fe, fa, fi, fo, fum. I smell the breath of an Englishman. Let him be alive, or let him be dead. I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "Nonsense," said the wife. "It is only a roasted bullock that I thought would be a titbit for your supper. Sit down, and I will bring it up at once." The giant sat down, and soon his wife brought up a roasted bullock on a large dish, and they began their supper. Jack was amazed to see them pick the bones of the bullock as if it had been a lark. As soon as they had finished their meal, the giantess rose and said, "Now, my dear, with your leave, I am going up to my room to finish the story I am reading. If you want me, call for me." "First," answered the giant, "bring me my money bags, that I may count my golden pieces before I sleep." The giantess obeyed. She went and soon returned with 2 large bags over her shoulders, which she put down by her husband. "There," she said, "that is all that is left of the night's money. When you have spent it, you must go and take another baron's castle." "That he shan't, if I can help it," thought Jack. The giant, when his wife was gone, took out heaps and heaps of golden pieces, and counted them and put them in piles, till he was tired of the amusement. Then he swept them all back into their bags, and leaning back in his chair, fell fast asleep, snoring so loud that no other sound was audible. Jack stole softly out of the wardrobe, and taking up the bags of money, which were his very own, because the giant had stolen them from his father, he ran off, and with great difficulty descending the beanstalk, laid the bags of gold on his mother's table. She had just returned from town, and was crying at not finding Jack. "There, mother, I have brought you the gold that my father lost." "Oh, Jack, you are a very good boy, but I wish you would not risk your precious life in the giant's castle. Tell me how you came to go there again." And Jack told her all about it. Jack's mother was very glad to get the money, but she did not like him to run any risk for her. But after a time, Jack made up his mind to go again to the giant's castle. The Talking Harp. So he climbed the beanstalk once more, and blew the horn at the giant's gate. The giantess soon opened the door. She was very stupid, and did not know him again, but she stopped a minute before she took him in. She feared another robbery, but Jack's fresh face looked so innocent that she could not resist him, and so she bade him come in and again hid him away in the wardrobe. By and by the giant came home, and as soon as he had crossed the threshold, he roared out, "Fe, fa, fee, fo, fum. I smell the breath of an Englishman. Let him be alive, or let him be dead. I'll grind his bones to make my bread." "You stupid old giant," said his wife. "You only smell a nice sheep, which I have grilled for your dinner." And the giant sat down, and his wife brought up a whole sheep for his dinner. When he had eaten it all up, he said, "Now bring me my harp, and I will have a little music while you take your walk." The giantess obeyed and returned with a beautiful harp. The framework was all sparkling with diamonds and rubies, and the strings were all of gold. "This is one of the nicest things I took from the night," said the giant. "I am very fond of music, and my harp is a faithful servant." So he drew the harp towards him and said, "Play," and the harp played a very soft, sad air. "Play something merrier," said the giant, and the harp played a merry tune. "Now play me a lullaby," roared the giant, and the harp played a sweet lullaby, to the sound of which its master fell asleep. Then Jack stole softly out of the wardrobe and went into the huge kitchen to see if the giantess had gone out. He found no one there, so he went to the door and opened it softly, for he thought he could not do so with the harp in his hand. Then he entered the giant's room and seized the harp and ran away with it. But as he jumped over the threshold, the harp called out, "Master, master!" And the giant woke up. With a tremendous roar, he sprang from his seat, and in 2 strides had reached the door. But Jack was very nimble. He fled like lightning with the harp, talking to it as he went, for he saw it was a fairy, and telling it he was the son of its old master, the knight. Still, the giant came on so fast that he was quite close to poor Jack, and had stretched out his great hand to catch him. But luckily, just at that moment, he stepped upon a loose stone, stumbled, and fell flat on the ground, where he lay at his full length. This accident gave Jack time to get on the beanstalk and hasten down it. But just as he reached their own garden, he beheld the giant descending after him. "Mother, mother," cried Jack, "make haste and give me the axe." His mother ran to him with a hatchet in her hand, and Jack, with one tremendous blow, cut through all the beanstalks except one. "Now, mother, stand out of the way," said he. The giant breaks his neck. Jack's mother shrank back, and it was well she did so, for just as the giant took hold of the last branch of the beanstalk, Jack cut the stem quite through and darted from the spot. Down came the giant with a terrible crash, and as he fell on his head, he broke his neck and lay dead at the feet of the woman he had so much injured. Before Jack and his mother had recovered from their alarm and agitation, a beautiful lady stood before them. "Jack," said she, "you have acted like a brave knight's son, and deserve to have your inheritance restored to you. Dig a grave and bury the giant, and then go and kill the giantess." "But," said Jack, "I could not kill anyone unless I were fighting with him, and I could not draw my sword upon a woman. Moreover, the giantess was very kind to me." The fairy smiled on Jack. "I am very much pleased with your generous feeling," she said. "Nevertheless, return to the castle and act as you will find needful." Jack asked the fairy if she would show him the way to the castle, as the beanstalk was now down. She told him that she would drive him there in her chariot, which was drawn by 2 peacocks. Jack thanked her and sat down in the chariot with her. The fairy drove him a long distance round, till they reached a village which lay at the bottom of the hill. Here they found a number of miserable-looking men assembled. The fairy stopped her carriage and addressed them. "My friends," said she, "the cruel giant who oppressed you and ate up all your flocks and herds is dead, and this young gentleman was the means of your being delivered from him, and is the son of your kind old master, the knight." The men gave a loud cheer at these words, and pressed forward to say that they would serve Jack as faithfully as they had served his father. The fairy bade them follow her to the castle, and they marched thither in a body, and Jack blew the horn and demanded admittance. The old giantess saw them coming from the turret loophole. She was very much frightened, for she guessed that something had happened to her husband. And as she came downstairs very fast, she caught her foot in her dress and fell from the top to the bottom and broke her neck. When the people outside found that the door was not open to them, they took crowbars and forced the portal. Nobody was to be seen, but on leaving the hall they found the body of the giantess at the foot of the stairs. Thus Jack took possession of the castle. The fairy went and brought his mother to him, with the hen and the harp. He had the giantess buried, and endeavored as much as lay in his power to do right to those whom the giant had robbed. Before her departure for Fairyland, the fairy explained to Jack that she had sent the butcher to meet him with the beans, in order to try what sort of lad he was. "If you had looked at the gigantic beanstalk and only stupidly wondered about it," she said, "I should have left you where misfortune had placed you, only restoring her cow to your mother. But you showed an inquiring mind and great courage and enterprise. Therefore you deserve to rise. And when you mounted the beanstalk, you climbed the ladder of fortune." She then took her leave of Jack and his mother. The Little Good Mouse. Once upon a time, there lived a king and queen who loved each other so much that they were never happy unless they were together. Day after day, they went out hunting or fishing. Night after night, they went to balls or to the opera. They sang and danced and ate sugar plums and were the gayest of the gay, and all their subjects followed their example, so that the kingdom was called the Joyous Land. Now, in the next kingdom, everything was as different as it could possibly be. The king was sulky and savage, and never enjoyed himself at all. He looked so ugly and cross that all his subjects feared him, and he hated the very sight of a cheerful face. So if he ever caught anyone smiling, he had his head cut off that very minute. This kingdom was very appropriately called the Land of Tears. Now when this wicked king heard of the happiness of the jolly king, he was so jealous that he collected a great army and set out to fight him. And the news of his approach was soon brought to the king and queen. The queen, when she heard of it, was frightened out of her wits and began to cry bitterly. "Sire," she said, "let us collect all our riches and run away as far as ever we can to the other side of the world." But the king answered, "Fie, madam, I am far too brave for that. It is better to die than to be a coward." Then he assembled all his armed men, and after bidding the queen a tender farewell, he mounted his splendid horse and rode away. When he was lost to sight, the queen could do nothing but weep and wring her hands and cry, "Alas, if the king is killed, what will become of me and of my little daughter?" And she was so sorrowful that she could neither eat nor sleep. The king sent her a letter every day, but at last, one morning, as she looked out of the palace window, she saw a messenger approaching in hot haste. "What news, courier? What news?" cried the queen, and he answered, "The battle is lost and the king is dead, and in another moment the enemy will be here." The poor queen fell back insensible, and all her ladies carried her to bed, and stood round her weeping and wailing. Then began a tremendous noise and confusion, and they knew that the enemy had arrived, and very soon they heard the king himself stamping about the palace seeking the queen. Then her ladies put the little princess into her arms and covered her up, head and all, in the bedclothes, and ran for their lives, and the poor queen lay there shaking and hoping she would not be found. But very soon the wicked king clattered into the room, and in a fury because the queen would not answer when he called to her, he tore back her silken coverings and tweaked off her lace cap. And when all her lovely hair came tumbling down over her shoulders, he wound it 3 times round his hand and threw her over his shoulder, where he carried her like a sack of flour. The poor queen held her little daughter safe in her arms and shrieked for mercy. But the wicked king only mocked her and begged her to go on shrieking, as it amused him, and so mounted his great black horse and rode back to his own country. When he got there, he declared that he would have the queen and the little princess hanged on the nearest tree. But his courtiers said that seemed a pity, for when the baby grew up, she would be a very nice wife for the king's only son. The king was rather pleased with this idea, and shut the queen up in the highest room of a tall tower, which was very tiny, and miserably furnished with a table and a very hard bed upon the floor. Then he sent for a fairy who lived near his kingdom, and after receiving her with more politeness than he generally showed, and entertaining her at a sumptuous feast, he took her up to see the queen. The fairy was so touched by the sight of her misery that when she kissed her hand, she whispered, "Courage, madam, I think I see a way to help you." The queen, a little comforted by these words, received her graciously, and begged her to take pity upon the poor little princess, who had met with such a sudden reverse of fortune. But the king got very cross when he saw them whispering together, and cried harshly, "Make an end of these fine speeches, madam. I brought you here to tell me if the child will grow up pretty and fortunate." Then the fairy answered that the princess would be as pretty and clever and well brought up as it was possible to be. And the old king growled to the queen that it was lucky for her that it was so, as they would certainly have been hanged if it were otherwise. Then he stamped off, taking the fairy with him, and leaving the poor queen in tears. "How can I wish my little daughter to grow up pretty if she is to be married to that horrid little dwarf, the king's son?" she said to herself. "And yet, if she is ugly, we shall both be killed. If I could only hide her away somewhere so that the cruel king could never find her." As the days went on, the queen and the little princess grew thinner and thinner, for their hard-hearted jailer gave them every day only 3 boiled peas and a tiny morsel of black bread, so they were always terribly hungry. At last, one evening, as the queen sat at her spinning wheel, for the king was so avaricious that she was made to work day and night, she saw a tiny, pretty little mouse creep out of a hole, and said to it, "Alas, little creature, what are you coming to look for here? I only have 3 peas for my day's provision, so unless you wish to fast, you must go elsewhere." But the mouse ran hither and thither, and danced and capered so prettily that at last the queen gave it her last pea, which she was keeping for her supper, saying, "Here, little one, eat it up. I have nothing better to offer you, but I give this willingly in return for the amusement I have had from you." She had hardly spoken when she saw upon the table a delicious little roast partridge and 2 dishes of preserved fruit. "Truly," said she, "a kind action never goes unrewarded," and she and the little princess ate their supper with great satisfaction, and then the queen gave what was left to the little mouse, who danced better than ever afterwards. The next morning came the jailer with the queen's allowance of 3 peas, which he brought in upon a large dish to make them look smaller. But as soon as he set it down, the little mouse came and ate up all 3, so that when the queen wanted her dinner, there was nothing left for her. Then she was quite provoked, and said, "What a bad little beast that mouse must be! If it goes on like this, I shall be starved." But when she glanced at the dish again, it was covered with all sorts of nice things to eat, and the queen made a very good dinner, and was gayer than usual over it. But afterwards, as she sat at her spinning wheel, she began to consider what would happen if the little princess did not grow up pretty enough to please the king. And she said to herself, "Oh, if I could only think of some way of escaping." As she spoke, she saw the little mouse playing in a corner with some long straws. The queen took them and began to plait them, saying, "If only I had straws enough, I would make a basket with them, and let my baby down in it from the window to any kind passer-by who would take care of her." By the time the straws were all plaited, the little mouse had dragged in more and more, until the queen had plenty to make her basket, and she worked at it day and night, while the little mouse danced for her amusement. And at dinner and supper time, the queen gave it the 3 peas and the bit of black bread, and always found something good in the dish in their place. She really could not imagine where all the nice things came from. At last, one day, when the basket was finished, the queen was looking out of the window to see how long a cord she must make to lower it to the bottom of the tower, when she noticed a little old woman who was leaning upon her stick and looking up at her. Presently she said, "I know your trouble, madam. If you like, I will help you." "Oh, my dear friend," said the queen, "if you really wish to be of use to me, you will come at the time that I will appoint, and I will let down my poor little baby in a basket. If you will take her and bring her up for me, when I am rich, I will reward you splendidly." "I don't care about the reward," said the old woman, "but there is one thing I should like. You must know that I am very particular about what I eat, and if there is one thing that I fancy above all others, it is a plump, tender little mouse. If there is such a thing in your garret, just throw it down to me, and in return I will promise that your little daughter shall be well taken care of." The queen, when she heard this, began to cry, but made no answer, and the old woman, after waiting a few minutes, asked her what was the matter. "Why," said the queen, "there is only one mouse in this garret, and that is such a dear, pretty little thing that I cannot bear to think of its being killed." "What?" cried the old woman in a rage. "Do you care more for a miserable mouse than for your own baby? Goodbye, madam. I leave you to enjoy its company, and for my own part, I thank my stars that I can get plenty of mice without troubling you to give them to me." And she hobbled off, grumbling and growling. As to the queen, she was so disappointed that, in spite of finding a better dinner than usual, and seeing the little mouse dancing in its merriest mood, she could do nothing but cry. That night, when her baby was fast asleep, she packed it into the basket and wrote on a slip of paper, "This unhappy little girl is called Delicia." This she pinned to its robe, and then, very sadly, she was shutting the basket when in sprang the little mouse and sat on the baby's pillow. "Ah, little one," said the queen, "it cost me dear to save your life. How shall I know now whether my Delicia is being taken care of or no? Anyone else would have let the greedy old woman have you and eat you up, but I could not bear to do it." Whereupon the mouse answered, "Believe me, madam, you will never repent of your kindness." The queen was immensely astonished when the mouse began to speak, and still more so when she saw its little, sharp nose turn to a beautiful face and its paws to hands and feet. Then it suddenly grew tall, and the queen recognized the fairy who had come with the wicked king to visit her. The fairy smiled at her astonished look and said, "I wanted to see if you were faithful and capable of feeling a real friendship for me. For you see, we fairies are rich in everything but friends, and those are hard to find. It is not possible that you should want for friends, you charming creature," said the queen, kissing her. "Indeed it is so," the fairy said. "For those who are only friendly with me for their own advantage, I do not count at all. But when you cared for the poor little mouse, you could not have known there was anything to be gained by it. And to try you further, I took the form of the old woman whom you talked to from the window. And then I was convinced that you really loved me." Then, turning to the little princess, she kissed her rosy lips 3 times, saying, "Dear little one, I promise that you shall be richer than your father, and shall live 100 years, always pretty and happy, without fear of old age and wrinkles." The queen, quite delighted, thanked the fairy gratefully, and begged her to take charge of the little Delicia and bring her up as her own daughter. This she agreed to do, and then they shut the basket and lowered it carefully, baby and all, to the ground at the foot of the tower. The fairy then changed herself back into the form of a mouse, and this delayed her a few seconds, after which she ran nimbly down the straw rope, but only to find when she got to the bottom that the baby had disappeared. In the greatest terror she ran up again to the queen, crying, "All is lost. My enemy Cancaline has stolen the princess away. You must know that she is a cruel fairy who hates me, and as she is older than I am and has more power, I can do nothing against her. I know no way of rescuing Delicia from her clutches." When the queen heard this terrible news, she was heartbroken and begged the fairy to do all she could to get the poor little princess back again. At this moment in came the jailer, and when he missed the little princess, he at once told the king, who came in a great fury, asking what the queen had done with her. She answered that a fairy, whose name she did not know, had come and carried her off by force. Upon this, the king stamped upon the ground and cried in a terrible voice, "You shall be hung. I always told you you should." And without another word he dragged the unlucky queen out into the nearest wood and climbed up into a tree to look for a branch to which he could hang her. But when he was quite high up, the fairy, who had made herself invisible and followed them, gave him a sudden push, which made him lose his footing and fall to the ground with a crash and break 4 of his teeth. And while he was trying to mend them, the fairy carried the queen off in her flying chariot to a beautiful castle, where she was so kind to her that but for the loss of Delicia, the queen would have been perfectly happy. But though the good little mouse did her very utmost, they could not find out where Cancaline had hidden the little princess. Thus 15 years went by, and the queen had somewhat recovered from her grief when the news reached her that the son of the wicked king wished to marry the little maiden who kept the turkeys, and that she had refused him. The wedding dresses had been made nevertheless, and the festivities were to be so splendid that all the people for leagues round were flocking in to be present at them. The queen felt quite curious about a little turkey maiden who did not wish to be a queen, so the little mouse conveyed herself to the poultry yard to find out what she was like. She found the turkey maiden sitting upon a big stone, barefooted and miserably dressed in an old, coarse linen gown and cap. The ground at her feet was all strewn with robes of gold and silver, ribbons and laces, diamonds and pearls, over which the turkeys were stalking to and fro, while the king's ugly, disagreeable son stood opposite her, declaring angrily that if she would not marry him, she should be killed. The turkey maiden answered proudly, "I never will marry you. You are too ugly and too much like your cruel father. Leave me in peace with my turkeys, which I like far better than all your fine gifts." The little mouse watched her with the greatest admiration, for she was as beautiful as the spring. And as soon as the wicked prince was gone, she took the form of an old peasant woman and said to her, "Good day, my pretty one. You have a fine flock of turkeys there." The young turkey maiden turned her gentle eyes upon the old woman and answered, "Yet they wish me to leave them to become a miserable queen. What is your advice upon the matter?" "My child," said the fairy, "a crown is a very pretty thing, but you know neither the price nor the weight of it." "I know so well that I have refused to wear one," said the little maiden, "though I don't know who was my father or who was my mother, and I have not a friend in the world." "You have goodness and beauty, which are of more value than 10 kingdoms," said the wise fairy. "But tell me, child, how came you here, and how is it you have neither father, nor mother, nor friend?" "A fairy called Cancaline is the cause of my being here," answered she. "For while I lived with her, I got nothing but blows and harsh words, until at last I could bear it no longer, and ran away from her without knowing where I was going. And as I came through a wood, the wicked prince met me and offered to give me charge of the poultry yard. I accepted gladly, not knowing that I should have to see him day by day. And now he wants to marry me, but that I will never consent to." Upon hearing this, the fairy became convinced that the little turkey maiden was none other than the Princess Delicia. "What is your name, my little one?" said she. "I am called Delicia, if it please you," she answered. Then the fairy threw her arms round the princess's neck and nearly smothered her with kisses, saying, "Ah, Delicia, I am a very old friend of yours, and I am truly glad to find you at last. But you might look nicer than you do in that old gown, which is only fit for a kitchen maid. Take this pretty dress, and let us see the difference it will make." So Delicia took off the ugly cap and shook out all her fair, shining hair, and bathed her hands and face in clear water from the nearest spring till her cheeks were like roses. And when she was adorned with the diamonds and the splendid robe the fairy had given her, she looked the most beautiful princess in the world. And the fairy, with great delight, cried, "Now you look as you ought to look, Delicia. What do you think about it yourself?" And Delicia answered, "I feel as if I were the daughter of some great king." "And would you be glad if you were?" said the fairy. "Indeed I should," answered she. "Ah, well," said the fairy, "tomorrow I may have some pleasant news for you." So she hurried back to her castle, where the queen sat busy with her embroidery, and cried, "Well, madam, will you wager your thimble and your golden needle that I am bringing you the best news you could possibly hear?" "Alas," sighed the queen, "since the death of the jolly king and the loss of my Delicia, all the news in the world is not worth a pin to me." "There, there, don't be melancholy," said the fairy. "I assure you the princess is quite well, and I have never seen her equal for beauty. She might be a queen tomorrow if she chose." And then she told all that had happened, and the queen first rejoiced over the thought of Delicia's beauty, and then wept at the idea of her being a turkey maiden. "I will not hear of her being made to marry the wicked king's son," she said. "Let us go at once and bring her here." In the meantime, the wicked prince, who was very angry with Delicia, had sat himself down under a tree and cried and howled with rage and spite until the king heard him and cried out from the window, "What is the matter with you, that you are making all this disturbance?" The prince replied, "It is all because our turkey maiden will not love me." "Won't love you? Eh?" said the king. "We'll very soon see about that." So he called his guards and told them to go and fetch Delicia. "See if I don't make her change her mind pretty soon," said the wicked king with a chuckle. Then the guards began to search the poultry yard, and could find nobody there but Delicia, who, with her splendid dress and her crown of diamonds, looked such a lovely princess that they hardly dared to speak to her. But she said to them very politely, "Pray tell me what you are looking for here." "Madam," they answered, "we are sent for an insignificant little person called Delicia." "Alas," said she, "that is my name. What can you want with me?" So the guards tied her hands and feet with thick ropes, for fear she might run away, and brought her to the king, who was waiting with his son. When he saw her, he was very much astonished at her beauty, which would have made anyone less hard-hearted sorry for her. But the wicked king only laughed and mocked at her, and cried, "Well, little fright, little toad, why don't you love my son, who is far too handsome and too good for you? Make haste and begin to love him this instant, or you shall be tarred and feathered." Then the poor little princess, shaking with terror, went down on her knees, crying, "Oh, don't tar and feather me, please. It would be so uncomfortable. Let me have 2 or 3 days to make up my mind, and then you shall do as you like with me." The wicked prince would have liked very much to see her tarred and feathered, but the king ordered that she should be shut up in a dark dungeon. It was just at this moment that the queen and the fairy arrived in the flying chariot, and the queen was dreadfully distressed at the turn affairs had taken, and said miserably that she was destined to be unfortunate all her days. But the fairy bade her take courage. "I'll pay them out yet," said she, nodding her head with an air of great determination. That very same night, as soon as the wicked king had gone to bed, the fairy changed herself into the little mouse, and creeping up onto his pillow, nibbled his ear, so that he squealed out quite loudly and turned over on his other side. But that was no good, for the little mouse only set to work and gnawed away at the second ear until it hurt more than the first one. Then the king cried, "Murder!" and "Thieves!" And all his guards ran to see what was the matter, but they could find nothing and nobody, for the little mouse had run off to the prince's room and was serving him in exactly the same way. All night long she ran from one to the other, until at last, driven quite frantic by terror and want of sleep, the king rushed out of the palace crying, "Help! Help! I am pursued by rats." The prince, when he heard this, got up also, and ran after the king, and they had not gone far when they both fell into the river and were never heard of again. Then the good fairy ran to tell the queen, and they went together to the black dungeon where Delicia was imprisoned. The fairy touched each door with her wand, and it sprang open instantly. But they had to go through 40 before they came to the princess, who was sitting on the floor looking very dejected. But when the queen rushed in and kissed her 20 times in a minute, and laughed and cried, and told Delicia all her history, the princess was wild with delight. Then the fairy showed her all the wonderful dresses and jewels she had brought for her, and said, "Don't let us waste time. We must go and harangue the people." So she walked first, looking very serious and dignified, and wearing a dress the train of which was at least 10 ells long. Behind her came the queen, wearing a blue velvet robe embroidered with gold, and a diamond crown that was brighter than the sun itself. Last of all walked Delicia, who was so beautiful that it was nothing short of marvelous. They proceeded through the streets, returning the salutations of all they met, great or small, and all the people turned and followed them, wondering who these noble ladies could be. When the audience hall was quite full, the fairy said to the subjects of the wicked king that if they would accept Delicia, who was the daughter of the jolly king, as their queen, she would undertake to find a suitable husband for her, and would promise that during their reign there should be nothing but rejoicing and merrymaking, and all dismal things should be entirely banished. Upon this, the people cried with one accord, "We will, we will. We have been gloomy and miserable too long already." And they all took hands and danced round the queen and Delicia and the good fairy, singing, "Yes, yes, we will, we will." Then there were feasts and fireworks in every street in the town, and early the next morning the fairy, who had been all over the world in the night, brought back with her, in her flying chariot, the most handsome and good-tempered prince she could find anywhere. He was so charming that Delicia loved him from the moment their eyes met, and as for him, of course he could not help thinking himself the luckiest prince in the world. The queen felt that she had really come to the end of her misfortunes at last, and they all lived happily ever after. Graciosa and Percinet. Once upon a time, there lived a king and queen who had one charming daughter. She was so graceful and pretty and clever that she was called Graciosa, and the queen was so fond of her that she could think of nothing else. Every day she gave the princess a lovely new frock of gold brocade, or satin, or velvet, and when she was hungry, she had bowls full of sugar plums and at least 20 pots of jam. Everybody said she was the happiest princess in the world. Now there lived at this same court a very rich old duchess whose name was Grumbly. She was more frightful than tongue can tell. Her hair was red as fire, and she had but one eye, and that not a pretty one. Her face was as broad as a full moon, and her mouth was so large that everybody who met her would have been afraid they were going to be eaten up. Only she had no teeth. As she was as cross as she was ugly, she could not bear to hear everyone saying how pretty and how charming Graciosa was. So she presently went away from the court to her own castle, which was not far off. But if anybody who went to see her happened to mention the charming princess, she would cry angrily, "It's not true that she is lovely. I have more beauty in my little finger than she has in her whole body." Soon after this, to the great grief of the princess, The queen was taken ill and died, and the king became so melancholy that for a whole year he shut himself up in his palace. At last his physicians, fearing that he would fall ill, ordered that he should go out and amuse himself. So a hunting party was arranged, but as it was very hot weather, the king soon got tired and said he would dismount and rest at a castle which they were passing. This happened to be the Duchess Grumbly's castle, and when she heard that the king was coming, she went out to meet him and said that the cellar was the coolest place in the whole castle if he would condescend to come down into it. So, down they went together, and the king, seeing about 200 great casks ranged side by side, asked if it was only for herself that she had this immense store of wine. "Yes, sire," answered she, "it is for myself alone, but I shall be most happy to let you taste some of it. Which do you like, Canary, St. Julian, Champagne, Hermitage sack, raisin, or cider?" "Well," said the king, "since you are so kind as to ask me, I prefer champagne to anything else." Then Duchess Grumbly took up a little hammer and tapped upon the cask twice, and out came at least 1,000 crowns. "What's the meaning of this?" said she, smiling. Then she tapped the next cask, and out came a bushel of gold pieces. "I don't understand this at all," said the Duchess, smiling more than before. Then she went on to the third cask. Tap, tap, and out came such a stream of diamonds and pearls that the ground was covered with them. "Ah," she cried, "this is altogether beyond my comprehension, sire. Someone must have stolen my good wine and put all this rubbish in its place." "Rubbish, do you call it, Madam Grumbly?" cried the king. "Rubbish? Why, there is enough there to buy 10 kingdoms." "Well," said she, "you must know that all those casks are full of gold and jewels, and if you like to marry me, it shall all be yours." Now the king loved money more than anything else in the world, so he cried joyfully, "Marry you? Why, with all my heart. Tomorrow if you like." "But I make one condition," said the Duchess. "I must have entire control of your daughter to do as I please with her." "Oh, certainly, you shall have your own way. Let us shake hands upon the bargain," said the king. So they shook hands and went up out of the cellar of treasure together, and the Duchess locked the door and gave the key to the king. When he got back to his own palace, Graciosa ran out to meet him and asked if he had had good sport. "I have caught a dove," answered he. "Oh, do give it to me," said the princess, "and I will keep it and take care of it." "I can hardly do that," said he, "for to speak more plainly, I mean that I met the Duchess Grumbly and have promised to marry her." "And you call her a dove?" cried the princess. "I should have called her a screech owl." "Hold your tongue," said the king very crossly. "I intend you to behave prettily to her. So now go and make yourself fit to be seen, as I am going to take you to visit her." So the princess went very sorrowfully to her own room, and her nurse, seeing her tears, asked what was vexing her. "Alas, who would not be vexed?" answered she, "for the king intends to marry again, and has chosen for his new bride my enemy, the hideous Duchess Grumbly." "Oh, well," answered the nurse, "you must remember that you are a princess, and are expected to set a good example in making the best of whatever happens. You must promise me not to let the Duchess see how much you dislike her." At first, the princess would not promise, but the nurse showed her so many good reasons for it that in the end she agreed to be amiable to her stepmother. Then the nurse dressed her in a robe of pale green and gold brocade, and combed out her long, fair hair till it floated round her like a golden mantle, and put on her head a crown of roses and jasmine with emerald leaves. When she was ready, nobody could have been prettier, but she still could not help looking sad. Meanwhile, the Duchess Grumbly was also occupied in attiring herself. She had one of her shoe heels made an inch or so higher than the other, that she might not limp so much, and put in a cunningly made glass eye in the place of the one she had lost. She dyed her red hair black and painted her face. Then she put on a gorgeous robe of lilac satin lined with blue, and a yellow petticoat trimmed with violet ribbons. And because she had heard that queens always rode into their new dominions, she ordered a horse to be made ready for her to ride. While Graciosa was waiting until the king should be ready to set out, she went down all alone through the garden into a little wood, where she sat down upon a mossy bank and began to think. And her thoughts were so doleful that very soon she began to cry, and she cried and forgot all about going back to the palace, until she suddenly saw a handsome page standing before her. He was dressed in green, and the cap which he held in his hand was adorned with white plumes. When Graciosa looked at him, he went down on one knee and said to her, "Princess, the king awaits you." The princess was surprised, and, if the truth must be told, very much delighted at the appearance of this charming page, whom she could not remember to have seen before. Thinking he might belong to the household of the Duchess, she said, "How long have you been one of the king's pages?" "I am not in the service of the king, madam," answered he, "but in yours." "In mine?" said the princess with great surprise. "Then how is it that I have never seen you before?" "Ah, princess," said he, "I have never before dared to present myself to you, but now the king's marriage threatens you with so many dangers that I have resolved to tell you at once how much I love you already, and I trust that in time I may win your regard. I am Prince Percinet, of whose riches you may have heard, and whose fairy gift will, I hope, be of use to you in all your difficulties, if you will permit me to accompany you under this disguise." "Ah, Percinet," cried the princess, "is it really you? I have so often heard of you and wish to see you. If you will indeed be my friend, I shall not be afraid of that wicked old Duchess any more." So they went back to the palace together, and there Graciosa found a beautiful horse which Percinet had brought for her to ride. As it was very spirited, he led it by the bridle, and this arrangement enabled him to turn and look at the princess often, which he did not fail to do. Indeed, she was so pretty that it was a real pleasure to look at her. When the horse which the Duchess was to ride appeared beside Graciosa's, it looked no better than an old cart horse, and as to their trappings, there was simply no comparison between them, as the princess's saddle and bridle were one glittering mass of diamonds. The king had so many other things to think of that he did not notice this, but all his courtiers were entirely taken up with admiring the princess and her charming page in green, who was more handsome and distinguished-looking than all the rest of the court put together. When they met the Duchess, Grumbly, she was seated in an open carriage, trying in vain to look dignified. The king and the princess saluted her, and her horse was brought forward for her to mount. But when she saw Graciosa's, she cried angrily, "If that child is to have a better horse than mine, I will go back to my own castle this very minute. What is the good of being a queen if one is to be slighted like this?" Upon this, the king commanded Graciosa to dismount, and to beg the Duchess to honor her by mounting her horse. The princess obeyed in silence, and the Duchess, without looking at her or thanking her, scrambled up upon the beautiful horse, where she sat looking like a bundle of clothes, and 8 officers had to hold her up for fear she should fall off. Even then, she was not satisfied, and was still grumbling and muttering, so they asked her what was the matter. "I wish that page in green to come and lead the horse, as he did when Graciosa rode it," said she, very sharply. And the king ordered the page to come and lead the queen's horse. Percinet and the princess looked at one another, but said never a word. And then he did as the king commanded, and the procession started in great pomp. The Duchess was greatly elated, and as she sat there in state would not have wished to change places even with Graciosa. But at the moment when it was least expected, the beautiful horse began to plunge and rear and kick, and finally to run away at such a pace that it was impossible to stop him. At first, the Duchess clung to the saddle, but she was very soon thrown off, and fell in a heap among the stones and thorns. And there they found her, shaken to a jelly, and collected what was left of her, as if she had been a broken glass. Her bonnet was here, and her shoes there. Her face was scratched, and her fine clothes were covered with mud. Never was a bride seen in such a dismal plight. They carried her back to the palace and put her to bed. But as soon as she recovered enough to be able to speak, she began to scold and rage, and declared that the whole affair was Graciosa's fault, that she had contrived it on purpose to try and get rid of her, and that if the king would not have her punished, she would go back to her castle and enjoy her riches by herself. At this, the king was terribly frightened, for he did not at all want to lose all those barrels of gold and jewels. So he hastened to appease the Duchess, and told her she might punish Graciosa in any way she pleased. Thereupon she sent for Graciosa, who turned pale and trembled at the summons, for she guessed that it promised nothing agreeable for her. She looked all about for Percinet, but he was nowhere to be seen, so she had no choice but to go to the Duchess Grumbly's room. She had hardly got inside the door when she was seized by 4 waiting women, who looked so tall and strong and cruel that the princess shuddered at the sight of them, and still more when she saw them arming themselves with great bundles of rods, and heard the Duchess call out to them from her bed to beat the princess without mercy. Poor Graciosa wished miserably that Percinet could only know what was happening and come to rescue her, but no sooner did they begin to beat her than she found, to her great relief, that the rods had changed to bundles of peacock's feathers, and though the Duchess's women went on till they were so tired that they could no longer raise their arms from their sides, yet she was not hurt in the least. However, the Duchess thought she must be black and blue after such a beating. So Graciosa, when she was released, pretended to feel very bad, and went away into her own room, where she told her nurse all that had happened, and then the nurse left her, and when the princess turned round, there stood Percinet beside her. She thanked him gratefully for helping her so cleverly, and they laughed and were very merry over the way they had taken in the Duchess and her waiting maids. But Percinet advised her still to pretend to be ill for a few days, and after promising to come to her aid whenever she needed him, he disappeared as suddenly as he had come. The Duchess was so delighted at the idea that Graciosa was really ill that she herself recovered twice as fast as she would have done otherwise, and the wedding was held with great magnificence. Now, as the king knew that above all other things, The queen loved to be told that she was beautiful. He ordered that her portrait should be painted and that a tournament should be held, at which all the bravest knights of his court should maintain against all comers that Grumbly was the most beautiful princess in the world. Numbers of knights came from far and wide to accept the challenge, and the hideous queen sat in great state in a balcony hung with cloth of gold to watch the contests, and Graciosa had to stand up behind her, where her loveliness was so conspicuous that the combatants could not keep their eyes off her. But the queen was so vain that she thought all their admiring glances were for herself, especially as, in spite of the badness of their cause, the king's knights were so brave that they were the victors in every combat. However, when nearly all the strangers had been defeated, a young unknown knight presented himself. He carried a portrait, enclosed in a bow encrusted with diamonds, and he declared himself willing to maintain against them all that the queen was the ugliest creature in the world, and that the princess whose portrait he carried was the most beautiful. So one by one the knights came out against him, and one by one he vanquished them all. And then he opened the box and said that, to console them, he would show them the portrait of his queen of beauty. And when he did so, everyone recognized the Princess Graciosa. The unknown knight then saluted her gracefully and retired, without telling his name to anybody. But Graciosa had no difficulty in guessing that it was Percinet. As to the queen, she was so furiously angry that she could hardly speak, but she soon recovered her voice and overwhelmed Graciosa with a torrent of reproaches. "What?" she said. "Do you dare to dispute with me for the prize of beauty, and expect me to endure this insult to my knights? But I will not bear it, proud princess. I will have my revenge." "I assure you, madam," said the princess, "that I had nothing to do with it, and am quite willing that you shall be declared Queen of Beauty." "Ah, you are pleased to jest, popinjay," said the queen, "but it will be my turn soon." The king was speedily told what had happened, and how the princess was in terror of the angry queen, but he only said, "The queen must do as she pleases. Graciosa belongs to her." The wicked queen waited impatiently until night fell, and then she ordered her carriage to be brought. Graciosa, much against her will, was forced into it, and away they drove, and never stopped until they reached a great forest, 100 leagues from the palace. This forest was so gloomy and so full of lions, tigers, bears, and wolves that nobody dared pass through it even by daylight. And here they set down the unhappy princess in the middle of the black night and left her in spite of all her tears and entreaties. The princess stood quite still at first from sheer bewilderment, but when the last sound of the retreating carriages died away in the distance, she began to run, aimlessly, hither and thither, sometimes knocking herself against a tree, sometimes tripping over a stone, fearing every minute that she would be eaten up by the lions. Presently, she was too tired to advance another step, so she threw herself down upon the ground and cried miserably, "Oh, Percinet, where are you? Have you forgotten me altogether?" She had hardly spoken when all the forest was lighted up with a sudden glow. Every tree seemed to be sending out a soft radiance, which was clearer than moonlight and softer than daylight, and at the end of a long avenue of trees. Opposite to her, the princess saw a palace of clear crystal, which blazed like the sun. At that moment, a slight sound behind her made her start round, and there stood Percinet himself. "Did I frighten you, my princess?" said he. I come to bid you welcome to our fairy palace in the name of the Queen, my mother, who is prepared to love you as much as I do." The princess joyfully mounted with him into a little sledge, drawn by 2 stags, which bounded off and drew them swiftly to the wonderful palace, where the Queen received her with the greatest kindness, and a splendid banquet was served at once. Graciosa was so happy to have found Percinet, and to have escaped from the gloomy forest and all its terrors, that she was very hungry and very merry, and they were a gay party. After supper they went into another lovely room, where the crystal walls were covered with pictures, and the princess saw with great surprise that her own history was represented, even down to the moment when Percinet found her in the forest. "Your painters must indeed be diligent," she said, pointing out the last picture to the prince. "They are obliged to be, for I will not have anything forgotten that happens to you," he answered. When the princess grew sleepy, 24 charming maidens put her to bed in the prettiest room she had ever seen, and then sang to her so sweetly that Graciosa's dreams were all of mermaids, and cool sea waves, and caverns in which she wandered with Percinet. But when she woke up again, her first thought was that, delightful as this fairy palace seemed to her, yet she could not stay in it, but must go back to her father. When she had been dressed by the 24 maidens in a charming robe which the Queen had sent for her, and in which she looked prettier than ever, Prince Percinet came to see her, and was bitterly disappointed when she told him what she had been thinking. He begged her to consider again how unhappy the wicked Queen would make her, and how, if she would but marry him, all the fairy palace would be hers, and his one thought would be to please her. But, in spite of everything he could say, the princess was quite determined to go back, though he at last persuaded her to stay 8 days, which were so full of pleasure and amusement that they passed like a few hours. On the last day, Graciosa, who had often felt anxious to know what was going on in her father's palace, said to Percinet that she was sure that he could find out for her, if he would, what reason the Queen had given her father for her sudden disappearance. Percinet at first offered to send his courier to find out, but the princess said, "Oh, isn't there a quicker way of knowing than that?" "Very well," said Percinet. "You shall see for yourself." So up they went together to the top of a very high tower, which, like the rest of the castle, was built entirely of rock crystal. There the prince held Graciosa's hand in his, and made her put the tip of her little finger into her mouth and look towards the town. And immediately she saw the wicked Queen go to the king, and heard her say to him, "That miserable princess is dead, and no great loss either. I have ordered that she shall be buried at once." And then the princess saw how she dressed up a log of wood and had it buried, and how the old king cried, and all the people murmured that the Queen had killed Graciosa with her cruelties, and that she ought to have her head cut off. When the princess saw that the king was so sorry for her pretended death that he could neither eat nor drink, she cried, "Ah, Percinet, take me back quickly if you love me." And so, though he did not want to at all, he was obliged to promise that he would let her go. "You may not regret me, princess," he said sadly, "for I fear that you do not love me well enough, but I foresee that you will more than once regret that you left this fairy palace where we have been so happy." But in spite of all he could say, she bade farewell to the Queen, his mother, and prepared to set out. So Percinet, very unwillingly, brought the little sledge with the stags, and she mounted beside him. But they had hardly gone 20 yards when a tremendous noise behind her made Graciosa look back, and she saw the palace of crystal fly into 1,000,000 splinters, like the spray of a fountain, and vanish. "Oh, Percinet," she cried, "what has happened? The palace is gone." "Yes," he answered, "my palace is a thing of the past. You will see it again, but not until after you have been buried." "Now you are angry with me," said Graciosa in her most coaxing voice, "though after all, I am more to be pitied than you are." When they got near the palace, the prince made the sledge and themselves invisible. So the princess got in unobserved and ran up to the great hall where the king was sitting all by himself. At first he was very much startled by Graciosa's sudden appearance, but she told him how the queen had left her out in the forest and how she had caused a log of wood to be buried. The king, who did not know what to think, sent quickly and had it dug up, and sure enough, it was as the princess had said. Then he caressed Graciosa and made her sit down to supper with him, and they were as happy as possible. But someone had by this time told the wicked queen that Graciosa had come back and was at supper with the king, and in she flew in a terrible fury. The poor old king quite trembled before her, and when she declared that Graciosa was not the princess at all, but a wicked impostor, and that if the king did not give her up at once, she would go back to her own castle and never see him again, he had not a word to say, and really seemed to believe that it was not Graciosa, after all. So the queen in great triumph sent for her waiting women, who dragged the unhappy princess away and shut her up in a garret. They took away all her jewels and her pretty dress, and gave her a rough cotton frock, wooden shoes, and a little cloth cap. There was some straw in a corner, which was all she had for a bed, and they gave her a very little bit of black bread to eat. In this miserable plight, Graciosa did indeed regret the fairy palace, and she would have called Percinet to her aid, only she felt sure he was still vexed with her for leaving him, and thought that she could not expect him to come. Meanwhile, the queen had sent for an old fairy, as malicious as herself, and said to her, "You must find me some task for this fine princess which she cannot possibly do, for I mean to punish her, and if she does not do what I order, she will not be able to say that I am unjust." So the old fairy said she would think it over, and come again the next day. When she returned, she brought with her a skein of thread, 3 times as big as herself. It was so fine that a breath of air would break it, and so tangled that it was impossible to see the beginning or the end of it. The queen sent for Graciosa and said to her, "Do you see this skein? Set your clumsy fingers to work upon it, for I must have it disentangled by sunset, and if you break a single thread, it will be the worse for you." So saying, she left her, locking the door behind her with 3 keys. The princess stood dismayed at the sight of the terrible skein. If she did but turn it over to see where to begin, she broke 1,000 threads, and not one could she disentangle. At last she threw it into the middle of the floor, crying, "Oh, Percinet, this fatal skein will be the death of me if you will not forgive me and help me once more." And immediately in came Percinet, as easily as if he had all the keys in his own possession. "Here I am, princess, as much as ever at your service," said he, "though really you are not very kind to me." Then he just stroked the skein with his wand, and all the broken threads joined themselves together, and the whole skein wound itself smoothly off in the most surprising manner. And the prince, turning to Graciosa, asked if there was nothing else that she wished him to do for her, and if the time would never come when she would wish for him for his own sake. "Don't be vexed with me, Percinet," she said. "I am unhappy enough without that." "But why should you be unhappy, my princess?" cried he. "Only come with me, and we shall be as happy as the day is long together." "But suppose you get tired of me," said Graciosa. The prince was so grieved at this want of confidence that he left her without another word. The wicked queen was in such a hurry to punish Graciosa that she thought the sun would never set. And indeed it was before the appointed time that she came with her 4 fairies. And as she fitted the 3 keys into the locks, she said, "I'll venture to say that the idle minx has not done anything at all. She prefers to sit with her hands before her to keep them white." But as soon as she entered, Graciosa presented her with the ball of thread in perfect order, so that she had no fault to find, and could only pretend to discover that it was soiled, for which imaginary fault she gave Graciosa a blow on each cheek that made her white and pink skin turn green and yellow. And then she sent her back to be locked into the garret once more. Then the queen sent for the fairy again and scolded her furiously. "Don't make such a mistake again. Find me something that it will be quite impossible for her to do," she said. So the next day the fairy appeared with a huge barrel full of the feathers of all sorts of birds. There were nightingales, canaries, goldfinches, linnets, tomtits, parrots, owls, sparrows, doves, ostriches, bustards, peacocks, larks, partridges, and everything else that you can think of. These feathers were all mixed up in such confusion that the birds themselves could not have chosen out their own. "Here," said the fairy, "is a little task which it will take all your prisoner's skill and patience to accomplish. Tell her to pick out and lay in a separate heap the feathers of each bird. She would need to be a fairy to do it." The queen was more than delighted at the thought of the despair this task would cause the princess. She sent for her, and with the same threats as before, locked her up with the 3 keys, ordering that all the feathers should be sorted by sunset. Graciosa set to work at once, but before she had taken out a dozen feathers, she found that it was perfectly impossible to know one from another. "Ah, well," she sighed, "the queen wishes to kill me, and if I must die, I must. I cannot ask Percinet to help me again, for if he really loved me, he would not wait till I called him. He would come without that." "I am here, my Graciosa," cried Percinet, springing out of the barrel where he had been hiding. "How can you still doubt that I love you with all my heart?" Then he gave 3 strokes of his wand upon the barrel, and all the feathers flew out in a cloud and settled down in neat little separate heaps all round the room. "What should I do without you, Percinet?" said Graciosa gratefully. But still she could not quite make up her mind to go with him and leave her father's kingdom forever. So she begged him to give her more time to think of it, and he had to go away disappointed once more. When the wicked queen came at sunset, she was amazed and infuriated to find the task done. However, she complained that the heaps of feathers were badly arranged, and for that the princess was beaten and sent back to her garret. Then the queen sent for the fairy once more and scolded her until she was fairly terrified, and promised to go home and think of another task for Graciosa, worse than either of the others. At the end of 3 days she came again, bringing with her a box. "Tell your slave," said he, "to carry this wherever you please, but on no account to open it." She will not be able to help doing so, and then you will be quite satisfied with the result." So, the queen came to Graciosa and said, "Carry this box to my castle and place it upon the table in my own room. But I forbid you on pain of death to look at what it contains." Graciosa set out, wearing her little cap and wooden shoes and the old cotton frock. But even in this disguise, she was so beautiful that all the passers-by wondered who she could be. She had not gone far before the heat of the sun and the weight of the box tired her so much that she sat down to rest in the shade of a little wood which lay on one side of a green meadow. She was carefully holding the box upon her lap when she suddenly felt the greatest desire to open it. "What could possibly happen if I did?" she said to herself. "I should not take anything out. I should only just see what was there." And without farther hesitation, she lifted the cover. Instantly, out came swarms of little men and women, no taller than her finger, and scattered themselves all over the meadow, singing and dancing and playing the merriest games, so that at first Graciosa was delighted and watched them with much amusement. But presently, when she was rested and wished to go on her way, she found that, do what she would, she could not get them back into their box. If she chased them in the meadow, they fled into the wood, and if she pursued them into the wood, they dodged round trees and behind sprigs of moss, and with peals of elfin laughter scampered back again into the meadow. At last, weary and terrified, she sat down and cried. "It is my own fault," she said sadly. "Percinet, if you can still care for such an imprudent princess, do come and help me once more." Immediately, Percinet stood before her. "Ah, princess," he said, "but for the wicked queen, I fear you would never think of me at all." "Indeed I should," said Graciosa. "I am not so ungrateful as you think. Only wait a little, and I believe I shall love you quite dearly." Percinet was pleased at this, and with one stroke of his wand compelled all the willful little people to come back to their places in the box. And then, rendering the princess invisible, he took her with him in his chariot to the castle. When the princess presented herself at the door and said that the queen had ordered her to place the box in her own room, the governor laughed heartily at the idea. "No, no, my little shepherdess," said he, "that is not the place for you. No wooden shoes have ever been over that floor yet." Then Graciosa begged him to give her a written message telling the queen that he had refused to admit her. This he did, and she went back to Percinet, who was waiting for her, and they set out together for the palace. You may imagine that they did not go the shortest way, but the princess did not find it too long, and before they parted, she had promised that if the queen was still cruel to her and tried again to play her any spiteful trick, she would leave her and come to Percinet forever. When the queen saw her returning, she fell upon the fairy, whom she had kept with her, and pulled her hair and scratched her face, and would really have killed her if a fairy could be killed. And when the princess presented the letter and the box, she threw them both upon the fire, without opening them, and looked very much as if she would like to throw the princess after them. However, what she really did do was to have a great hole as deep as a well dug in her garden, and the top of it covered with a flat stone. Then she went and walked near it, and said to Graciosa and all her ladies who were with her, "I am told that a great treasure lies under that stone. Let us see if we can lift it." So they all began to push and pull at it, and Graciosa among the others, which was just what the queen wanted. For as soon as the stone was lifted high enough, she gave the princess a push which sent her down to the bottom of the well. And then the stone was let fall again, and there she was a prisoner. Graciosa felt that now, indeed, she was hopelessly lost. Surely not even Percinet could find her in the heart of the earth. "This is like being buried alive," she said with a shudder. "Oh, Percinet, if you only knew how I am suffering for my want of trust in you. But how could I be sure that you would not be like other men and tire of me from the moment you were sure I loved you?" As she spoke, she suddenly saw a little door open, and the sunshine blazed into the dismal well. Graciosa did not hesitate an instant, but passed through into a charming garden. Flowers and fruit grew on every side, fountains plashed, and birds sang in the branches overhead. And when she reached a great avenue of trees and looked up to see where it would lead her, she found herself close to the palace of crystal. Yes, there was no mistaking it, and the queen and Percinet were coming to meet her. "Ah, princess," said the queen, "don't keep this poor Percinet in suspense any longer. You little guess the anxiety he has suffered while you were in the power of that miserable queen." The princess kissed her gratefully and promised to do as she wished in everything, and holding out her hand to Percinet, with a smile, she said, "Do you remember telling me that I should not see your palace again until I had been buried? I wonder if you guessed then that, when that happened, I should tell you that I love you with all my heart and will marry you whenever you like." Prince Percinet joyfully took the hand that was given him, and for fear the princess should change her mind, the wedding was held at once with the greatest splendor, and Graciosa and Percinet lived happily ever after. The Three Princesses of Whiteland. There was once upon a time a fisherman who lived hard by a palace and fished for the king's table. One day he was out fishing, but caught nothing at all. Let him do what he might with rod and line, there was never even so much as a sprat on his hook. But when the day was well nigh over, a head rose up out of the water and said, "If you will give me what your wife shows you when you go home, you shall catch fish enough." So the man said yes in a moment, and then he caught fish in plenty. But when he got home at night, and his wife showed him a baby which had just been born, and fell a-weeping and wailing when he told her of the promise which he had given, he was very unhappy. All this was soon told to the king up at the palace, and when he heard what sorrow the woman was in, and the reason of it, he said that he himself would take the child and see if he could not save it. The baby was a boy, and the king took him at once and brought him up as his own son until the lad grew up. Then one day he begged to have leave to go out with his father to fish. He had a strong desire to do this, he said. The king was very unwilling to permit it, but at last the lad got leave. He stayed with his father, and all went prosperously and well with them the whole day, until they came back to land in the evening. Then the lad found that he had lost his pocket handkerchief, and would go out in the boat after it. But no sooner had he got into the boat than it began to move off with him, so quickly that the water foamed all round about, and all that the lad did to keep the boat back with the oars was done to no purpose, for it went on and on the whole night through. And at last he came to a white strand that lay far, far away. There he landed, and when he had walked on for some distance, he met an old man with a long white beard. "What is the name of this country?" said the youth. "Whiteland," answered the man. And then he begged the youth to tell him whence he came and what he was going to do. And the youth did so. "Well then," said the man, "if you walk on farther along the seashore here, you will come to 3 princesses who are standing in the earth, so that their heads alone are out of it. Then the first of them will call you. She is the eldest, and will beg you very prettily to come to her and help her, and the second will do the same, but you must not go near either of them. Hurry past as if you neither saw nor heard them, but you shall go to the third, and do what she bids you. It will bring you good fortune." When the youth came to the first princess, she called to him and begged him to come to her very prettily. But he walked on as if he did not even see her. And he passed by the second in the same way, but he went up to the third. "If thou wilt do what I tell thee, thou shalt choose among us 3, said the princess. So the lad said that he was most willing, and she told him that 3 trolls had planted them all 3 there in the earth, but that formerly they had dwelt in the castle, which he could see at some distance in the wood. "Now," she said, "thou shalt go into the castle, and let the trolls beat thee one night for each of us, and if thou canst but endure that, thou wilt set us free." "Yes," answered the lad, "I will certainly try to do so." "When thou goest in," continued the princess, 2 lions will stand by the doorway, but if thou only goest straight between them, they will do thee no harm. Go straight forward into a small, dark chamber. There thou shalt lie down. Then the troll will come and beat thee, but thou shalt take the flask which is hanging on the wall, and anoint thyself wheresoever he has wounded thee, after which thou shalt be as well as before. Then lay hold of the sword which is hanging by the side of the flask, and smite the troll dead." So he did what the princess had told him. He walked straight in between the lions just as if he did not see them, and then into the small chamber, and lay down on the bed. The first night a troll came with 3 heads and 3 rods, and beat the lad most unmercifully. But he held out until the troll was done with him, and then he took the flask and rubbed himself. Having done this, he grasped the sword and smote the troll dead. In the morning, when he went to the sea shore, the princesses were out of the earth as far as their waists. The next night, everything happened in the same way, but the troll who came then had 6 heads and 6 rods, and he beat him much more severely than the first had done. But when the lad went out of doors next morning, the princesses were out of the earth as far as their knees. On the 3rd night a troll came, who had 9 heads and 9 rods, and he struck the lad and flogged him so long that at last he swooned away. So the troll took him up and flung him against the wall, and this made the flask of ointment fall down, and it splashed all over him, and he became as strong as ever again. Then, without loss of time, he grasped the sword and struck the troll dead. And in the morning, when he went out of the castle, the princesses were standing there entirely out of the earth. So he took the youngest for his queen, and lived with her very happily for a long time. At last, however, he took a fancy to go home for a short time to see his parents. His queen did not like this, but when his longing grew so great that he told her he must and would go, she said to him, "One thing shalt thou promise me, and that is, to do what thy father bids thee, but not what thy mother bids thee." And this he promised. So she gave him a ring, which enabled him who wore it to obtain 2 wishes. He wished himself at home, and instantly found himself there. But his parents were so amazed at the splendor of his apparel that their wonder never ceased. When he had been at home for some days, His mother wanted him to go up to the palace to show the king what a great man he had become. The father said, "No, he must not do that, for if he does, we shall have no more delight in him this time." But he spoke in vain, for the mother begged and prayed until at last he went. When he arrived there, he was more splendid, both in raiment and in all else, than the other king, who did not like it, and said, "Well, you can see what kind of queen mine is, but I can't see yours. I do not believe you have such a pretty queen as I have. Would to heaven she were standing here, and then you would be able to see," said the young king. And in an instant she was standing there. But she was very sorrowful, and said to him, "Why didst thou not remember my words, and listen only to what thy father said? Now must I go home again at once, and thou hast wasted both thy wishes." Then she tied a ring in his hair, which had her name upon it, and wished herself at home again. And now the young king was deeply afflicted, and day out and day in went about thinking of naught else but how to get back again to his queen. "I will try to see if there is any place where I can learn how to find Whiteland," he thought, and journeyed forth out into the world. When he had gone some distance, he came to a mountain, where he met a man who was lord over all the beasts in the forest, for they all came to him when he blew a horn which he had. So the king asked where Whiteland was. "I do not know that," he answered, "but I will ask my beasts." Then he blew his horn and inquired whether any of them knew where Whiteland lay. But there was not one who knew that. So the man gave him a pair of snowshoes. "When you have these on," he said, "you will come to my brother, who lives hundreds of miles from here. He is lord over all the birds in the air. Ask him. When you have got there, just turn the shoes so that the toes point this way, and then they will come home again of their own accord." When the king arrived there, he turned the shoes as the lord of the beasts had bidden him, and they went back. And now he once more asked after Whiteland, and the man summoned all the birds together, and inquired if any of them knew where Whiteland lay. No, none knew this. Long after the others there came an old eagle. He had been absent 10 whole years, but he too knew no more than the rest. "Well, well," said the man, "then you shall have the loan of a pair of snowshoes of mine. If you wear them, you will get to my brother, who lives hundreds of miles from here. He is lord of all the fish in the sea. You can ask him, but do not forget to turn the shoes round." The king thanked him, put on the shoes, and when he had got to him who was lord of all the fish in the sea, he turned the snowshoes round, and back they went just as the others had gone. And he asked once more where Whiteland was. The man called the fish together with his horn, but none of them knew anything about it. At last came an old pike, which he had great difficulty in bringing home to him. When he asked the pike, it said, "Yes, Whiteland is well known to me, for I have been cook there these 10 years. Tomorrow morning I have to go back there, for now the queen, whose king is staying away, is to marry someone else. If that be the case, I will give you a piece of advice," said the man. "Not far from here on a moor stand 3 brothers, who have stood there 100 years fighting for a hat, a cloak, and a pair of boots. If anyone has these 3 things, he can make himself invisible. And if he desires to go to any place, he has but to wish, and he is there. You may tell them that you have a desire to try these things, and then you will be able to decide which of the men is to have them." So the king thanked him and went, and did what he had said. "What is this that you are standing fighting about forever and ever?" said he to the brothers. "Let me make a trial of these things, and then I will judge between you." They willingly consented to this, but when he had got the hat, the cloak, and the boots, he said, "Next time we meet, you shall have my decision." And hereupon he wished himself away. While he was going quickly through the air, he fell in with the north wind. "And where may you be going?" said the north wind. "To Whiteland," said the king. And then he related what had happened to him. "Well," said the north wind, "you can easily go a little quicker than I can, for I have to puff and blow into every corner. But when you get there, place yourself on the stairs by the side of the door, and then I will come blustering in as if I wanted to blow down the whole castle. And when the prince who is to have your queen comes out to see what is astir, just take him by the throat and fling him out, and then I will try to carry him away from court." As the north wind had said, so did the king. He stood on the stairs, and when the north wind came howling and roaring, and caught the roof and walls of the castle till they shook again, the prince went out to see what was the matter. But as soon as he came, the king took him by the neck and flung him out, and then the north wind laid hold of him and carried him off. And when he was rid of him, the king went into the castle. At first the queen did not know him, because he had grown so thin and pale from having traveled so long and so sorrowfully. But when she saw her ring, she was heartily glad. And then the rightful wedding was held, and held in such a way that it was talked about far and wide.